All right. And we're off. All right, guys. Welcome back. Saturday Night Live, Better Dead Than Red podcast. We got John Wineland with us tonight, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his case and everything that happened. Remember, he's the fellow that represented himself and beat, what was that, John? 15 counts you beat out of 20?
Well, it started with 22 counts, and they only found me guilty of this five misdemeanor charges.
Right. Okay. So I guess we'll start off with, because we were talking offline there about, sounds like you had a little bit of a feud going with the Tyrone police to begin with. So can you explain how that all began and how it kind of seemed like it manifested them destroying your house one day?
Well, it all started because I got pulled over for driving without a license, and they ran my name and seen who I was. And then it just progressed from there. Every time something would happen in my neighborhood, they would always assume it was me doing something, and they'd always come pounding on my door.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
So, so about how long did this go on?
With the Tyrone Police Department?
Yeah. How long have they been harassing you, essentially?
It's probably about the last 6 years.
6 years. Okay. Was there an officer in particular?
Austin Miller is the main one for the last 2 years that every time he seen me, he'd drive around the block just to see if I would say anything to him or anything. Because he actually stopped me one night when I was walking home from our local club and used his finger to wave me over to Tyrone Sheets. So I went over, and he actually ended up arresting me for public intoxication because I was drinking that night.
Yeah. So, and you,
Wow.
obviously, if you walked over there, and because I know how the streets in Tyrone are about the same as Altoona, so if you can walk on the streets, that's a pretty good test for you probably weren't that intoxicated.
No, and like the club was like, it's probably like 10 blocks from my house, but I had to walk past Sheets, and when I seen him there, I actually went over because it actually started at the same club in Tyrone. They actually came in and removed me from the club and tried to arrest me for public intoxication that night. But I said, how can you do that when you pulled me out of a private club?
Right.
And that's when it really all started.
Well, and
because he tried to arrest. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, what? So what? They'd rather you drive, and they probably do so then they could get you for a DUI, you know?
Well, like I said, that all started with me getting caught driving without a license because I had DUIs from back in the 90s, and I ain't allowed to drive. So it was my fault for driving without a license, but that's what started it all.
Right. Yeah, so it was, once again, it's a tiny, kind of a dumb infraction that starts the lead up to your house getting destroyed, essentially. So I'm assuming, too, because at least in one of the articles, obviously we don't know how accurate the articles are. That's part of the reason I'm having you on here to tell your story, because, you know, the paper gets stuff wrong all the time. But obviously, from what you've told me, I feel like that was the issue with why you didn't want to come out when the Tyrone police were there, because I'm sure you don't trust them, you know, to begin with. And
Not at all.
right. So, and then whenever they made it clear that, you know, it was the state police, then I guess you were a little more open to talking to them.
Well, I even told the state police officer I'd come out for him. I was talking to a negotiator. And I said, if it's Tyrone police, I ain't doing nothing for him. And that's how the night progressed, was he kept saying about Tyrone police. And I said, I ain't doing nothing for the Tyrone police.
Right. So when this situation kicked off, I'm assuming that Tyrone responded first. How long were they there until PSP arrived, at least as far as you were aware?
I was actually asleep when it all started, when my wife went to the police station. That was at like, I think 5:30, 6 o'clock. State police didn't arrive on scene, I guess, until like 10 o'clock. Well, there was state police out there, I guess, but the CERT team itself didn't show up till like 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock, I think.
Okay, so did Tyrone PD actually attempt to make contact with you at all, or did they just call in the state?
Well, at one point, when my wife had left the house, like 2 hours later, I think it was at like 7:30, I actually walked out on my porch, and I seen fire trucks, and I was watching the fire trucks, and at some point I heard somebody yell, "Show me your hands." And I raised my hands, and no police came towards me, but I seen somebody run down our side street. So I figured I wanted no part of that, and I went back in the house, and then I didn't have contact with them again until they blew in my window at like 10:30 at night.
Wow. So did the state police attempt to? You're saying they didn't attempt to contact you, they just showed up and demolished your
Well, they
house?
said they were out there with a loudspeaker or something, but I had passed out in my house. I was drinking that day.
Right.
I'm sure it was in the paper I was drinking, but
Well, you're allowed to
I was
drink in your own house, believe it or not.
yeah.
So,
Well, not around here, I guess
well,
you ain't.
maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe there's an ordinance in Tyrone that you're not allowed to drink in your own house. I don't know.
But yeah, it wasn't until I'm pretty sure it was around 10:30 at night. They said they were outside with loudspeaker, but I was passed out in my bed with I don't know if you ever seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
That it was playing on my TV, and it's a war movie. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually thought I heard something when I was watching the movie. They said it was a flashbang, I guess, but
Right.
I thought it was in the movie and went right back to sleep. And I was asleep until they blew in my window.
Well, it sounds like if you were sleeping, you were a real big nuisance to the public and a real threat to everybody, big terrorist guy, because you were sleeping and drinking in your own house.
Sleeping quite
Well,
soundly as
that's
well, it sounds.
well, that's the whole thing that started this. Was I asked them while I was at my trial why they just didn't come to my house, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when Officer Austin Miller said he didn't want to die. But my wife had told them from the beginning that I'd be in there passed out and that
Right.
our doors were unlocked, but they couldn't even just come to my house.
Right. And unfortunately, this is a really great lesson for anybody. It's unfortunate because they always say, "Oh, the police are, they're there to help you and everything else," but you go for their help, and this is what you get.
Well, that's how my wife testified at the trial too. Was she went there to get help to de-escalate a situation, and all he did was escalate it.
Mm-hmm.
6 minutes into her being there, he goes into a back room and calls off Chief Walk, who's our chief of police down here,
Mm-hmm.
and tells her he needs a CERT team.
Because he was so afraid of you drinking and sleeping.
Yeah, she even told
What a
like I
presence.
said, my wife even told him that I'd be in there sleeping and that the doors were unlocked.
Well, it's in case anybody's not aware, this Austin Miller has another as a civil lawsuit against him in Clearfield County. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to try and get into details and go off the top of my head. But just know this guy's had some issues elsewhere, so I wasn't surprised when I learned that, and then I see this situation play out the way. Now, I honestly I would have expected better from the state police. They're kind of hit or miss sometimes on this kind of stuff, but I don't know how it gets to the point of we're just going to, flashbang CS grenade his house just because he's in there, whatever. Obviously, like you're in your house, so they can't even say you were a danger to the public or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know it. That's like we had a 27-foot camper beside my house. They destroyed it just because they said it was in the way, yet they knew I was in my house.
Wow. So, did you talk to your insurance company or anything? Is there any chance that they'll you'll be able to get this covered other than just having to sue the police or the county or the state or whatever?
Well, the insurance company ain't covering nothing,
Mm-hmm.
but my wife's trying to file a civil suit against Tyrone Police because of what they did.
Right. Well, definitely, and I know people argue hindsight's 2020, but I think this definitely could have been if they would have went for de-escalation, which that's the thing is at least on your end, from what I understand, there really wasn't any escalation once the police got involved.
Well, even through the whole night, I kept telling them that I wasn't, because when I was talking to the negotiator through the night, multiple times I told him I wasn't harming anybody
Mm-hmm.
and that I was just confused and I needed time to think. And all he wanted me to do was come out to Tyrone Police, and I kept telling him I wasn't coming out to the Tyrone Police.
Right. Well, and given the history with them, I don't blame you. So that's
And that's not an unreasonable request. You just got woke up to
yeah,
basically hell on your doorstep. That's not unreasonable to be like, hey, give me a second to, wake up and figure out what the hell's even going on right now.
yeah. It's
I'm
just
like that on a normal day, on a normal wake up. I can't imagine the other kind. Jeez.
yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about the trial a little bit. What compelled you to decide to represent yourself? Because I know any attorney you talk to, they'll be, oh, that's a terrible, like even you see if an attorney gets in trouble, the first thing they do is get an attorney. So what compelled you to represent yourself?
Because all I wanted to do is tell the truth, and there wasn't nothing hard about telling the truth.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good
Because
answer.
I also had a trial in November that I got found not guilty of because they tried to say I had firearms,
Right.
and the jury found me not guilty in November of possession of firearms.
Mm-hmm.
But even the whole way through that trial, I had attorney Con, and he every time I had to say something, they colloquied you. I'm not sure if I'm saying that word right, but all it is saying you're going against your attorney's advice.
Okay.
Because
right.
I even testified during that trial, and it was the attorneys don't want you to say anything. They just want the prosecution to prove their case and think that's enough to resolve a trial.
Right. Well, and depending on, I know in certain circumstances, the thought process behind that is basically if you don't go on the stand, then the only thing the jury's weighing is whether or not they think what the prosecution witnesses are saying is true. And when they put you up there, now they have to weigh, are you telling the truth? Is the other person, is it, because, it's sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. Sometimes it's like a situation you were in where it was just a ridiculous allegation to begin with. But, um, so first day of the trial, I think you had to usually have the police testify.
Yeah, that's what they did for the first 3 days. It was all prosecution witnesses.
Right. So did you get any like good one-liners in and catch them in a few lies?
Well, every police officer that testified lied, to be honest, because like even Michael Whiteford from the Bellwood Police Department, he's 300 feet behind my house, but he's trying to testify that what was going on in front of my house. He tried to say he was 300 feet behind my house, and he could hear the screen door opening on my house, and I was out there saying nothing. And as God is my witness, I never said nothing when I went out on my porch. When they said, show me your hands, I raised my hands and
Right.
nothing happened. So I went back in my house is what started all that.
So when you were questioning Austin Miller, is there anything memorable from that exchange?
Well, like I said, as soon as there was videos of his body cam when my wife and daughters went to the police station, and as soon as my daughter walked into the police station, she said the first thing she tells them is she's covered in blood, and she says, this is all my dad's blood. I cut my dad, and this blood's all mine. But like I said, 6 minutes when he's talking to Chief Walk in the back behind closed doors, he's telling Chief Walk that I stabbed my daughter in the face and that she's covered in blood. And she didn't have a stab wound to her face. Me and her fought over a knife, and she pulled back on it and it poked herself, is why it was a 1 centimeter cut to her face. Right. And he's telling Chief Walk that it's a facial laceration on her face and she's covered in blood, but he fails to tell her that it's my blood my daughter told him she's covered in.
Wow. So not even, police officers, and I mean, everybody embellishes stuff, but police officers like to, but that was just a straight up lie. It instantly escalated everything, sounds like.
Yeah, he escalated it real quick there when he said she had a facial laceration. And I have the doctor's report that says it was a 1 centimeter cut, because I showed that at the trial, where she even testified that she pulled back on the knife, and that's why it was only a 1 centimeter cut, because as soon as it touched her, she stopped pulling backwards.
Right.
But even during the trial, I asked Officer Miller why he didn't just come up and knock on my door. I said, an investigation's supposed to be two-sided. I said, you didn't even want to try to get my side of the story. What happened? Right. He said, no, I was afraid to die if I had came to the door. And not once did I threaten the police at all.
Well, and he knew damn well that you didn't stab your daughter either, so.
Yeah, I even have body cam videos of when the Tyrone police first came to my house. They're out there making jokes about it, saying, oh, yeah, she cut him, so he stabbed her. And they knew from Officer Miller never said that. My daughter said she self-inflicted the wound, but he was still telling the other officers that I had stabbed her.
Wow. So we'll go back to before the trial, did they, because they usually do, did they try to, they being the prosecution, did they try to get you to plead, give you a plea deal, and say, I'll just take this and we'll whatever?
Well, like I said, in November, I had my first jury trial,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to give me 5 to 15 years. And I asked my attorney, I said, okay, well, if I plead guilty, what do I get? He said 5 to 15 years. I said, well, you leave me no choice but going to go to trial.
Well, yeah, that wasn't much of a deal there. That was
No, because if I'd have got found guilty, I'd have got the same sentence.
yeah, that's kind of weird, but there again though, I think they definitely have a grudge against you, and I know damn well that plays into this kind of stuff. If you got the wrong name, or you call them out on their shit, or obviously, like you
Well,
said, they've been harassing. The Tyrone's been harassing you for a long time, so I'm sure the DA's familiar with you too.
well, I've been to court because, like I said, when they drugged me out of the private club, I had to take a plea for a disorderly conduct. I got a $489 fine
Mm-hmm.
because I called the people at the bar assholes. So I got a disorderly conduct charge, but they had like 6 charges then.
Right.
But even for my second jury trial, Judge Bernard asked the prosecution to come up with a deal on the Thursday. It was the Wednesday or Thursday before he was supposed to come up with a deal so that I wouldn't go to trial, but he never even did that.
Wow. That's unreal. So you had like I forget what the technical term is, but like a standby attorney from the public defender's office when you were what did you think of them? Were they helpful? Was it like you could have just completely did without them? What were your thoughts on them? And who was it?
No, Attorney Julia Burke was the standby counsel, but they
Okay.
made her sit in the back row so that the jury knew I was representing myself.
Okay.
But she actually spoke up a couple times during my trial to try to help me and help me through the trial.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about Jolie because everybody kind of brags on the public defender's office just because, and it's not their fault. They have so many cases. They don't have time to put as much effort in because that's one of the reasons I always recommend people get a private attorney, because if you leave it up to the public defender's office through no fault of their own, they just don't have time to put the amount of effort into a private, by which just because you get a private attorney doesn't mean it's going to go your way either. There's some pretty shitty private attorneys in Blair County, and just like that, I don't know if you saw that Michael Cohen guy that was I guess he was forging judges' signatures and shit on custody documents.
Yes, I seen that too.
Yeah, so, and you can only imagine how much money, because I know I've gotten a couple messages from different people about money he's basically scammed them out of for stuff he was supposed to do he never did, or it's unreal. And I'm sure he'll probably just get a slap on the wrist because he's part of the boys club.
Well, I had attorney Kahn from Grable and Sealy for my first trial, and it was a 5-day trial, and he charged me 11 grand just for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
But he was trying to tell me he wasn't ready for a jury trial in 2 weeks when I first hired him. I said, that ain't my problem, guy. I said, you're bought and paid for, and we're doing this through a jury trial.
Yep.
And he was like, well, I'm not ready for this. And all he wanted to do was continue everything.
Oh yeah, that's a big problem because you have a right to a speedy trial, allegedly, but when your attorney just keeps taking 100 continuances, and they all do because they're getting paid. I forget. It's usually a couple $100 just to go to call the list. Stand up and
Well,
yeah, I'm here. And go ahead.
That's a problem with this county too, because everybody has the right to that speedy trial.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't tell your attorney that he's allowed to waive that, they can't waive it. But most people don't know that, because that's what they tried to do to me, was say my attorney waived it. And I said, he can't waive shit without me doing it.
Right. Well, and that's the problem. Go ahead.
That's how I got the trial in November, because I enforced that 180-day rule because I got arrested at the end of July.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was enforcing the 180-day rule is why they took me to court. And they only took me to court for one charge in November out of 22.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just for the possession of firearms, because they said it benefited me. But I don't know how it benefited me, because I wasn't even allowed to bring it up in my second trial that I was found not guilty.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, yeah, if you would have been found guilty, then I'm sure they would have found a way to bring that up to use it against you. but
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they would have.
because that's what they do. Which DA was on your case?
Derek Alinsky did the first one, but then they tried to use Ian Hosner for the second one, but he resigned from the whole DA's office, so they had to use Derek Alinsky for the second one.
Derek Alinsky. He's like I don't even know how to describe him. If you've never seen him, it's like his gut enters the room and then he does.
Like,
I know he sweats a lot.
He's a big boy.
Yeah, he is that.
Yeah. Everybody be, why are you ragging on him? That's, you can't make fun of him for being fat. It's like, no, I make fun of him because he's dumb too. I mean, I honestly, out of everybody that I've seen come and go through that office, I've never seen Alinsky be malicious like some of them.
No,
he's not the brightest bulb in the shed, but I will give him that. I don't think I've ever seen him prosecute a case where it was personal or it was malicious or anything like that.
he wasn't like that at all because he did actually help me through the trial because for some reason my laptop wouldn't work through the court system.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually allowed me for the first day to use his computer to show the video because I think it was more harmful. He thought it'd be more harmful for me than because he was only showing clips of it. I said, no, I want to show the jury the whole thing.
Right. Well, and that's another thing, just to touch on body cams and dash cams and all that. A lot of when they first came out, like I know when APD first got, and there were some guys that didn't like the idea, but it works both ways because if the cops are doing what they're supposed to, the body cam's going to be evidence to back up what they're saying. Now, if you're not doing what you're supposed to and you're just used to being able to, lie through your teeth, well, now you got a record, a video of it. So I think body cams are a great thing because it tells the whole story because I'm sure you're aware.
I'm aware because the jury didn't like the first body cam of the police officer that came and started evacuating my neighborhood instead of knocking on the door because all he did was use a 4-letter word through the whole thing.
Wow. And this was, so when they started evacuating people, was this fairly late already?
No, this is within minutes after this all happened.
Okay.
As soon as my wife goes to the police station, they called in the police to start evacuating the neighborhood because they said it was a dangerous situation, and it was.
Wow.
Like I said, all they had to do was come to my door and seen it was unlocked, and if I went and answered it, I was in there passed out sleeping. They could have just came in and got me.
Yeah, that's unreal. But like I said, I'm not surprised because it's just they really need to clean up that department. I don't know much about that chief. I don't think she's been there very long. There was another guy that was in there around the time that they got rid of Hollis. I guess he still got pending stuff or whatever. Because actually, a friend of mine told me that Hollis was the best one he dealt with over there. So that should tell you something.
Well, I had a few run-ins with him too, and I don't understand that either. I don't understand how a police officer can get accused of one thing in one town and just get a new job in another town, because I hear he's now a police officer up in Glitzen.
Yeah, I don't know well, I know they did drop some of the charges that were against him. I'd have to look it up on the portal, but I don't know if he could get a job up there. I know Barton's been around a couple places. Obviously, Austin Miller's been at least one other place.
Well, that's like even Officer Barton.
Mm-hmm.
He was right there when Austin Miller knew I had a domestic situation going on, and here he was arrested for a domestic situation where he choked his wife, but he only got disorderly conduct.
Yeah, I think
judge said, said, how you laying a foundation to ask him about that? I said, well, he knew how fast a domestic situation could escalate. And I said he could have solved it real quick too, but he chose to go with Austin Miller.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know some folks that have some issues with Barton, particularly the way because he's usually involved with all the drug stuff.
Well, and he's the one that tried to say he found the firearm that I knew nothing about in my house. They had 3 police officers searching my house, but the same rooms they were in, he happened to go in one and said he found a firearm in it.
So
where he got it from, I can't say, because it had nothing to do with me, but somehow he came up with a firearm.
So are you saying that there's a possibility it was left there by the police, and then they magically
Well,
found it?
it wasn't mine, and they said it belonged to some 100-year-old lady. But they didn't charge me with that.
Do you know if was it serialized? Did they run a? Because I know in Pennsylvania they do. This is another fun thing about PSP. So, according to the Pennsylvania state constitution, it is illegal to have a gun registry. However, when you go to buy a handgun, there's an addition. You have to fill out the federal forms, the 4473, and there's another form. I forget the number on it, but it has the Pennsylvania State Police logo on the top. And it's basically, when you buy a handgun, it's essentially you fill that paperwork out and it goes into their registry. So
Yes.
they can actually look up handguns that are now if you got something from like 100 years ago, it's probably not in the system. But anything I'd say probably within the last at least 20 years since I've been close to that since I've been buying guns, um, they should be able to find who it belongs to, or at least who legally purchased it anyway.
Well, the lady they said it belonged to purchased it in '89, and they had a paper saying that she bought it.
Mm-hmm.
But it had no connection to me at all.
Right. Yeah,
Just leave it in there.
well they must have, I'm sure they have a, the evidence locker. They got their
Well, that's where this supposed gun stayed the whole time. That's how I got found not guilty in my first trial, because they didn't even run ballistics or anything on it. And like when my daughter cut my hand, I was covered in blood, but this gun that he supposedly found had no blood or anything on it.
right.
The
Yeah.
ghost did it.
Yeah.
The ghost did it.
Yeah,
The
is your-
ghost dropped the magical gun into the house.
Is
I
your
had
is
no
your house
explanation.
haunted?
Well, that's like they tried to ask if this lady ever lived in our house, and my wife and her family has owned this house for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I said, no, that
the
lady
ghost did
never
it.
lived there.
Wow.
Wow,
That's
that's a stretch.
so. Since you represented yourself, do you have any advice for anybody that would be in a similar situation to you? Would you do anything differently as far as how you handled court? Would you consider getting an attorney? Or are you happy with the result you got? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, if I would have had an attorney, I don't even think I'd have been found guilty of the 5 charges I was guilty of.
Mhm.
But they would have probably found me guilty of the other charges, because I wouldn't have been able to say the things I did during court. So am I happy with how it turned out? Not really, because I didn't know the law, because I should have emphasized on the things that I did get found guilty of, because like the disorderly conduct alone, they said you had to be in public. I was never
Right.
out in the public. And
Yep.
then the fleeing and eluding, I had the state police logs throughout the night of the whole incident, and they see me multiple times standing at my refrigerator, standing at my daughter's bedroom after they blew in the windows. And if I would have known those things and been a lawyer myself, I could have probably emphasized those things during my trial, but I didn't know that, because like the fleeing and eluding, they said about you had to conceal yourself. Well, I never concealed myself in my house. I was in my house, but I didn't conceal myself.
Right.
They see me multiple times in there just standing in the kitchen, because after they first blow in my window, I go downstairs. They tear gassed my house 7 times, and I think 5 of them were in the attic. And I asked them why they kept tear gas in the attic, and they said, well, everybody hides in the attic. I said, well, common people don't go near the gas, so I wasn't in my attic.
Right. Yeah, that's unreal. Well, I hope you get everything figured out, and hopefully, if you can let me know, keep me in the loop about the lawsuit, and
Okay.
it's whenever it gets filed, it'll be public record. Maybe you can come on, and I don't know if really there'll be anything to add just when it gets filed, because you pretty much went over everything here.
Yeah, because they destroyed my house. I even asked Corporal King from the state police if they gave permission to destroy my house. He said, no, I gave them permission to break windows. Well, they didn't break windows. They broke my foundation in my house. He said he didn't even authorize that. I said, well, somebody did it.
Wow. So what would you say damage wise? What specific, other than just the foundation? How much was damaged with the house?
All right, well, I had 16 windows in my house. They blew out 13 of them. The 2 windows in the room that I was actually in, they didn't break.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 3 doors on my house. They blew in all 3 doors. I mean, they literally cleared out the door frames.
Right.
And 5 of the windows, they didn't just break the windows. They literally pulled the frames out of the windows.
Wow. All right. Well, I think we've pretty much covered anything. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just don't trust Tyrone Police Department if you want to resolve something.
I think the overall lesson from this is, especially with domestic situations, be very wary of getting the government involved, because the second you get, it's just like child custody. I always tell everybody, do everything in your power to resolve it outside of court, because once you get the government involved, it is going to be a freaking shit show every time. Every time.
And it is.
So, and that's the problem too. Like, say, I know you represented yourself, but when you have an attorney, if you pay for an attorney, even if you get found not guilty of everything, you lose all that time. You usually got to take time off of work. You have all the attorney's fees. Like, even when you win, you don't really win. Like, the government always wins, essentially.
Because they spend all that time dragging your name through the mud, and then they don't even really announce whenever.
Well,
oh, yeah, by the way,
like
we
what
were wrong.
just like what the paper did to you. You know, they printed felony real big, and it was bullshit. It wasn't even true. You didn't get convicted of any felonies.
No, and they only put a little 1-inch section of a correction in both papers, Tyrone, Daily Herald, and the Out to the Mirror. They made sure they put big felony on the front of their page, but for the corrections, it's like in the middle of the paper, just a little correction.
Yeah, they don't really want people to see that, but they like the felony to be out there to get everybody's attention.
Look how good we are. Look at what we're doing. All this good stuff. Oh, wait, we messed up. Don't. Here we admitted it, but just don't mind that. Shh, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's not there.
Yes.
Like I said, during my first trial, I got found not guilty, but that cost me $11,000 to do that too.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money to have to put into attorney, and then you still have to fix your house too.
Yeah.
Because like Attorney Connie said, aren't you happy you got found not guilty? I said, no, because you only resolved 1 charge. I got to deal with the other 21 that you caused.
Yep.
Because I was hoping for 1 trial at one time.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't work out that way.
What was their reason for severing that charge separate from everything else?
Because they said it was a gun charge and it would influence the jury for all the other charges by saying there was a gun charge. So they severed the gun charge to have a trial just by itself, because they were pretty sure they were going to find me guilty of it.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to call it a night here, because the dog just knocked my drink over. So
All right.
sucks doing live sometimes. But yeah, thanks for being on the show. Have you back anytime. Like I said, keep me in the loop if anything new happens, and we'll go from there.
But like you said, if you can resolve it without any law enforcement or anything, that's the best way to go.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Have a good night, John.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Don't mind me. I'm fending the dog off to keep the drink from getting worse, y'all.
Go figure, right, guys? I mean, I hope you got something out of the interview. I hope you liked it. And, of course, the dog had to ruin it at the end. I knew I shouldn't have sat my drink there, but there's not really room on our table. And the problem is
big cup.
Is you probably noticed we're using the green screen here, and it doesn't like my cup. So you can see translucent. So, yeah, that's all for tonight. Like I said, hope you got something out of it. And he's absolutely right don't get the police involved unless you absolutely have to, guys. It's not worth it.
No.
Because you never know. Even if you're completely in the right and you're calling for help, you never know how it's going to get turned around on you. So it's better to just not. So that's all we got for tonight. This is BDTR Podcast Live. And we will see you guys Wednesday night. Should be Wednesday night at 8. So
Till next time.
until next time.